We had one dude, our squadron tracked for 6 years, right? And we finally got him. We did it constantly where you'd have one person on a target, right? If I'm sitting over your house, right, watching you day in, day out, you know, figuring out what you're doing so I can figure out when's the best time to take you out, and just turns, shoots the guy next to him. He drops, and the dude starts just walking away like it's a normal Sunday afternoon. And I followed him, and eventually, like, he got into a car and rode and drove away, and I followed him for like 4 hours, and then my shift ended and I went home. You know,
and you're supposed to carry that with you.
Exactly.
No, it's great to have you all, man. It really is. It's great to connect with you. And I've not talked to many people who have, or drone operators, right, in the past. So it's kind of new to me. The only exposure I've ever had to drones was when I was living in Hawaii. And my neighbor was a Marine Corps captain who was a drone. And he did something with drones. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but I invited him over to the house one day. We were having a barbecue, and I had a 3D print farm in my garage, right? Just a wall of 3D printers on the shelf. And I was just big into 3D printing. This guy's like, dude, you got to stop by the hangar because we're always 3D printing. We have these industrial 3D printers, and we're always 3D printing stuff for our drone parts. So I went over there. It was completely different from what I was doing.
Yeah.
And I was like on a big scale, right? So that's really the only exposure I had to it. But you were the actual operator. So you maneuvered the stuff. I mean, you saw action without having boots on the ground, essentially. But before we get into that, man, I really want to get a grasp on you, the person, and kind of build up from there, right? So we have Tanner. Who is Tanner? What can you tell me about you?
Absolutely. Well, you know, 15 years ago, when I joined the military and everything else, right? I got a good origin story with it all, and you know, I was a snot nose, skinny punk kid, and you know, thinking I could take on the world, and you know, I didn't want to go to college at the time, which is comical now. You know, with my journey and everything else, and academia, and all of it. But you know, back then I was just like, I have no intention of, you know, doing that. You know, I didn't apply myself when I was in high school. I didn't care. You know, it's kind of like whatever. But really you know, so back in 2010 when I enlisted, nobody had a clue what a you know, RPA was, what a drone was, what a sensor operator was, right? With it, and you know, and so I remember going in and like the recruiter's like, hey, you know, let's look at some jobs, and this one happened to just pop up, and it was like control a camera, and you know, and I'm like, oh, that sounds kind of cool, like sure, let's do that, you know, kind of thing. And because that was really it, right? And nobody understood it, because that was about the time that they really started to ramp up. 2011 for sure. So you know, we're in the furnace of it, and I you know, I had no clue walking in. I didn't even realize that they employed weapons until I was like a couple weeks into training, and somebody made a comment, and I was like, wait, what? You know, it was like hold on, like, you know, because at this point, you know, the first employment on a Predator was like 2001 or 2002 with it, and they were used so sparingly. Right. But then, you know, 08, 09, roughly, you know, we're heavy into GWAT at that point. And people are realizing, holy cow, like we can see around the next corner, right? We can see over that hill. We can get, you know, raid support. We can get convoy support, you know, those types of things with it, and be able to, you know, and then, oh, by the way, you have these things start slinging Hellfire missiles.
Just taking a few seconds of your time. Thank you for watching and listening to The Green Logbook. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. It really helps out, and it will help me out to bring great content your way. Now back to the show.
You know, at pinpoint accuracy, every JTAC wanted them, right? I mean, they had an error of like less than 10 feet with it, which when you go into like World War II and stuff like that, you had bombs that were missing by 1,600 miles with it. Like it was nuts with it. And so, you know, talk about an evolution in precision and everything else with it. But But yeah, so I just kind of fell into it, is the best, way to describe the whole thing. Because I definitely didn't have a clue, granted when my time came, and it was time to, sit down and the rubber meets the road and I got to employ that first time. It was, I was there to, do my job, at the end of the day. And that's really what we looked at it as, is just, hey, at the end of the day, we're providing support. It was awesome. We'd get calls from the JTACs and stuff that we'd work with, after missions, and then be like, hey man, like, thanks for saving my ass out there, that kind of stuff. So, and I remember getting one of those calls like really early on. And I was like, this is fucking cool. you know like, it was like, this is so badass. Like, I'm sitting there 19 years old, like, getting calls from halfway around the world, like, hey man, like, thanks for saving my bacon, on there. And I'm like, this is freaking awesome. So it
Yeah,
was
it's
it
like the
was living the
dream of
dream.
every young person that wants to join the military, right? They want to be in it. Um, and then especially when you get the calls back, the after action
Yeah.
briefs and all that, like, dude, here's what you did. You're like, wow, you really had an impact on the mission. So yeah, that's cool, dude. So give me a visual, man. Like, is it? I've never been in a. I've been in like a command center, like a COC and all that stuff, right? But I've never been into I guess a drone operations room. I don't know what the call what the term is. What do you walk into? Is it like a room full of screens? Is it black and white? Like, what do you see?
Yeah, for sure. So as far as that goes, like, right, we're because you're gonna have somebody that's going in and coordinating the mission for the day, right? Some basics of, like, let's take the MQ-9 for example. There, that little beautiful bird right above my head. There, I got the Predator right below it. But that thing's got the Reaper's got a 66-foot wingspan on it. So it's not a small aircraft by any means, right? Over 20 feet in length. On it. It's got a ramp weight of 10,500 pounds for it. And so, big aircraft, right? Two-person crew. You've got a pilot that controls the plane, right? All the sensor operators call him the bus driver there, and be like, hey, man, drive that bus and get me into the spot, right? Because, it's, me as a sensor operator, right, controlling the camera, lasing in weapons, that kind of stuff. The pilot pulls the trigger, we laze at that point, and it's like 30 seconds, for average time of flight, and different things like that. Hellfire missiles, bombs, I mean, it can do it all. And up now, man, they're carrying like eight different, or eight, up to eight Hellfire missiles, with it, which is just nuts. It was, the Predator back in the day had one, mainly because the dang thing was so heavy. It was a 110-pound missile, that when you had the little itsy bitsy Predator out there, it could only carry one. Otherwise, it just killed its fuel efficiency. So that's your baseline, right, to set the scene as far as, what the aircraft itself is. So then you've got, a day TV camera or an infrared camera on the aircraft itself, as well as like a low light camera too, for it. And so that was my job, right, is to know like what to switch, when to switch, how to manipulate it, because it's not like, especially in this day and age with AI and everything else, right? Especially back then, like, yeah, we had, we could set the iris to an auto mode, but most of the time we were the ones manually manipulating the picture, to be able to pull out features, right? Pull out hotspots, pull out, hey, is that a hotspot in the road, or what is that, kind of thing? Hey, what's that guy wearing? Let's get a better picture of him, that kind of stuff. So we were really, at this high level of intel. So then when you walk into the operations cell, right, that we'd call it, and you'd have your mission commander there that was in charge of, the whole squadron for that shift, right? Because that's the one thing with this. People don't understand that these things were and are constantly operating 24/7, 365. Right. This isn't like a fighter that's like, oh, we're going to go on alert, and, get them on the ramp and be ready to go. No, we freaking, you almost always walked in, and some squadrons did it a little differently, right? With it, some squadrons were, on maybe only on a 10-hour vol or a 12-hour vol, but there was a handful out there that were going just 24/7, right? So when you walked into this op cell, it was just walls of TVs, right? And that was almost every op cell I ever walked into. It was these walls of TVs and everything else with it. And, it's all active missions. So you could look up and see one guy sitting static on a building and staring at a mud hut, because that's where they've been for the last 3 days. Or you could see some, one that's got a vehicle, that they're following, or a person that they're, trying to get really good fidelity on and stuff like that, right? Because that was the intel piece, right? And it really was a kind of, we think of intel, and then you bring in the strike platform, right? And it's kind of, for the longest time we've thought of it as two different separate entities, really. But the MQ9 really changed the game with that, right? Because one, you had this unblinking eye that could sit above a target and be able to look down, right? And we did it constantly, where you'd have one person on a target, right? If I'm sitting over your house, right, watching you day in, day out, figuring out what you're doing, so I can figure out when's the best time to take you out, right? Kind of thing. We call that patterns of life. It's very typical in like high value ops with it. Otherwise, the other mission set you have is the counterinsurgency, right? And that was the one that, with GWAT, we did a lot of, right? So it was a lot of things of watching convoys, providing raid support if, ground forces were going through and clearing villages, watching helos come in, infill, exfil, LZs and stuff like that, too. So you kind of had your two different aspects with the whole thing. And usually, each squadron did things a little bit differently. They had their own, ROE and spins and everything else, being the special instructions and that kind of stuff, right? With it. So it was really just dependent on what your unit did, right? There were so many different mission sets that people don't even realize. I mean, we were trained in close combat search and rescue,
Really?
in our schoolhouse there. So it's wild, how many things we had our hands in, being, such a capable aircraft.
Is that possible? Like to do search and rescue with that,
Mm-hmm.
the drone?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, like the initial fix, like trying to, catch a dude in the air is really freaking hard. But I mean, and there was all the time, like I mean, there was times where like if we had, especially early on, they had really crappy generators in the aircraft. And so we'd have to literally go find another aircraft midair, with it, and be able to lock onto it. And that way we could kind of escort it back, if you will, kind of thing. So similar tactics there, right? With the combat search and rescue, we're going off the, oh God, see if my schoolhouse brain can still remember it. I think it's like the 3.72 or something like that, with the joint pub, for combat search and rescue. I might have that mixed up, but it's one of those that, we did the 3093 for close air support, right? We did, all those different ones, and 3.72 might be the SCAR one if for the strike coordination. But, we had all these different mission sets that they trained to, and that's how the initial training went. Right, is you went down to the schoolhouse in New Mexico, and you got, here's what your buttons do, right, initially, call it the TR phase, and then we get into like, all right, here's how to do basic intelligence collection, with it. Here's how to do basic weapons employment, and then let's bring in some of the different mission sets there. So whether it's close air support, strike coordination, reconnaissance, air interdiction, combat search and rescue, those were kind of the staples of the schoolhouse. Now, obviously, with what we have going on now in the world, that's probably going to change, since we've gone away from coin. But that, there was a lot more than people realized that we were trained to do, which also made us just so dang good at being, flexible and make these quick decisions, because we were right there, finger on the trigger at any time.
Right. And where's the schoolhouse?
That's at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico.
Okay, New Mexico. I thought you said Mexico.
Yeah.
I was like, holy
no,
crap,
no, no,
a schoolhouse out there.
Yeah, no, New Mexico.
Did you start out in that military occupational specialty, or how'd that go about? Like, you were presented with this by the recruiter. He's like, that's what I want to, or you're like, that's what I want to do.
Pretty much.
Is that basically how it happened? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Especially back then, it was just, again, a paragraph on a screen, and just being like, hey, yeah, sounds good. And like I said, it took me it's like 3-4 weeks into my initial training, with just getting like academic training. And someone's like, yeah, when you employ a missile. And I'm like, wait, what?
Mm.
It's like, no clue. And they were so, they realized the need for it right back then. And they actually, what they did to fill the pilot slots, right? Because you're not going to necessarily, it isn't the most big and beautiful, sleek aircraft, sexiest aircraft in the world, right? It's not a Hog, it's not a Viper, or anything like that, right? It's an MQ-9, and especially the Predator, man. I think it essentially had a lawnmower engine strapped to its ass there. So like, you want to be like, hey man, you want to go fly lawnmowers? Like, no, but nobody's doing that, right? It ain't happening. But it was actually a snowmobile engine, Rotax on the Predator there, but the Reaper had like a 900 shaft horsepower engine on it. And actually, I believe it was Rolls Royce there, if I remember right. But one of the bigger names, right, with it. But yeah, the pilots themselves, those were actually pulled from the fighter community. So they literally took anybody that, had any type of nick, on their, in their career, and were just like, oh, whether that's medical, whether that's, whatever, and just went, oh, hey, you're going to Reapers, which, so you want to take a dude that is flying one of the most fastest and capable aircraft in the Air Force's industry and slap him into a freaking one that just sits there and goes at 105 knots. These guys were pissed, right? They came in
Imagine.
with just chips on their shoulder, but they were hands down some of the best pilots I've ever flown with. I had the great opportunity to work at the weapons school a handful of times for the Air Force. Sit in the rooms with the best of the best of the best, with Hogs and Vipers and everything else, with it, and it was always so cool, with especially in those moments too, because anybody that got into Reapers, especially the pilots, and especially early on, right, were just so prideful still, right, with those pilots and wanting to go in and be like, listen, yep, I'm in a crappy scenario. I might not be in the aircraft I want to be in, right, with it, but damn it, they made it, and that's why a lot of our traditions and things like that, unbeknownst to many people, actually followed fighter pilot traditions,
Yeah,
with a lot of
I
it,
can imagine.
just because of coming from that community.
Yeah, I can imagine how they could have come in with some chips on their shoulders. You take somebody from, going at this high level and sticking them somewhere else, like, hey, now you're going to be introduced to this, but it's not as high speed.
Hmm.
That's what you're used to. And yeah, I can see that. I've dealt with folks like that in the past where it's like, hey, now you're working here. Why? Why do we do things this way? What, I can imagine. So
Absolutely.
basically you were kind of a not boots on the ground, right? And I say that because, that's mostly like infantry stuff
Hmm.
and you're Air Force, right? Just to,
Yep.
again, you're not boots on the ground, but it does take a significant toll. And there's definitely a weight that comes along with that. I mean, from what you see, from what you feel, when did you begin to feel that weight of your missions? How many missions, and then approximately when did you start to feel like this is kind of a heavy thing that's weighing on me?
Yeah. So to put that question into perspective, right? I'll set a couple things out. One, I flew in 3 years and 11 months, 10 or 11 months. I flew over 1,000 combat missions, and I flew, I think, 2,900 combat hours, with it. Put that into perspective, a fighter pilot usually, like, I had a dean that worked in the college I did, and at the University of North Dakota, and and I believe he came from fighters,
Mhm.
if I remember right. But he had like 3,000 hours in a 30-year career, right? And we were doing these in like 4 years because it was super common for people in specific units to do over 1,000 hours in a year, which is 10 times, when you do the math on it, 10 times the operational tempo of any other aircraft, right? With it. So one, I say all that to say, you didn't know, you didn't recognize, even after 1,000 missions, and all this time, and even, even after getting away from combat, because I left combat in 15, went to the schoolhouse for almost 4 years, taught down there, and then I went and taught at General Atomics for a couple years after. None of this hit me until I left General Atomics. And that's the wild part is, and that's a very common theme I see within this community, right? Because I talk to veterans in this community daily. And that's the biggest thing is people don't realize how much it's impacting them until they literally step out of what we call the box, right? Because the ground control station is like I don't remember the exact dimensions, but maybe 20 by 10 foot, looks like a shipping container,
Hmm.
kind of thing. Nice carpeted, padded walls in there. It's so much fun. There. I wish I was kidding about that part. But and then it's cold as heck because there's a million computers running inside the thing. So you want to talk about like being in isolation and stuff, right? It's
Yeah,
strange.
sounds
With
like
it,
it.
yeah. So it was really, like I said, it really didn't hit you until after the fact, right? And I see that very common trend within this community is people don't realize it because it's such a high tempo, regardless of where you're at, right? It didn't matter, the schoolhouse was looked at as like, hey, this is that safe haven, right? You can go down there, ACC family days, Monday through Friday, because that's the thing, right? In ops, in the combat environment, we were working shift work on top of everything because again 24/7 365, right? You've got to have coverage the entire time, so that means, well, I've got to have, I've got to run shift work for it. So we were on 7 week rotations for 4 years. You want to talk about being fucking tired? Holy crap. I was beat by the end of that, and it was like, and so then it was like, hey, let's go to the schoolhouse, right? That'll be super good. But it really wasn't because then, yes, we had crew rests to abide by and everything else, right? You had 12 hours from when you left the ground control station to when you could go back in, right? Which sounds great, but when you're getting that max performed constantly, and we did, right? Because everybody wanted more and more and more, pilots and sensor operators. So the training pipeline just blew open, right? And they're doing like 200 to 300%. They're about to go for another ramp up here next year. I've got a couple contacts down at the schoolhouse that are saying they're going up to 150% training next year. So, but that was constantly, I mean, we literally had it called the surge, right? In multiple times. It was like, hey, the surge is back. And
Oh
we knew
no.
that, hey, we're cranking out people, right? That meant maybe 2 training events a day, kind of thing. You're double turning events. Me as evaluator, I'd be double turning evals, with it, which was just, it wasn't, in the moment, it was like, okay, whatever, this is my job, but holy cow, like, you just never got a break. It was just day in, day out. Even the schoolhouse, I was teaching every single day, with it. And so you didn't really hit you until you truly, truly left and walked away from it and either took that flight suit or that polo completely off. Because when you're in the soup, you are just at this insane fire hose pace 24/7 that I don't think people recognize it when they're in the moment.
Yeah, because you're constantly on the go, right? You have that rhythm going.
Yeah.
So when you, like you mentioned, you took off the polo, you took off the suit, right? You left is it General Atomics?
Yep.
Is that what it is? Okay, you
Yep.
left that. So what was that feeling? What was that defining piece right there that said, it's kind of breaking down now?
Hmm.
What did you feel?
Yeah. I mean, it was a slow burn for dealing with it and recognizing it and things like that, because that was the biggest thing is I didn't realize I was having so many issues and struggling so hard until, years later. It was just kind of like, because what's the standard coping? Well, alcohol and stuff like that, right? With it. And it was like, I was constantly hitting the bottle, with it and constantly coping with it. And, it was just because for me, I got really bad physical symptoms. So like because think about it, right? We had to we did shift work. We were watching these people, right, day in and day out, right? And then you're also watching, especially for like the high value stuff, right? Because it wasn't always when I employed a weapon, right? It wasn't just like, oh, well, for me, I employed 5 different times, where I was personally laser guiding ammunitions. Um, and that wasn't the stuff that bugged me, right? The stuff that bugged me was the stuff that, we either we're trying to get a guy, and we're going after him. We need him to take a left, right? And he keeps taking a right, keeps taking a right. Right. And you could do that for weeks, months. We had
Yeah.
one dude, our squadron tracked for 6 years, right? And we finally got him, right? Because he decided to poke his head out of some cave, right? With it. And it's like, so that aspect to it, right? And then you're having to watch all the locals and stuff do horrible things to each other, right? Because we all know in these countries and things like that, right? There's some pretty extreme views, right? With it. And so that's the thing. It's like, man, I've watched more people die through infrared than I have live. Because of just the constant exposure. And then you also have it's not like, hey, one and done, right? This isn't World War II. I don't roll in, drop a bomb, and bounce out. And I'm like, heck no. We sat on that target for weeks, months, years ahead of time. You got personal accountability with your targets, right? You felt responsible for them. So then, regardless if you took it out or somebody else did, right? It was like, oh man, that was my shot, right? Because you felt the moral, obligation because of all the time that maybe you sat and watched them. And then also you're watching them just live their lives, right? Which was a huge part of this. And you're watching them go and play with their kids. You're watching them hug their wife. You're watching them feed the goats. And then you're watching them go and build a bomb. And then the second they're gone, it's all right, next target. Right. I remember one time I was watching two guys walk down an alleyway. One guy, they're both in the long, man dresses that they'd wear. And the one dude reaches underneath, and pulls out a gun and just turns, shoots the guy next to him. He drops, blood starts pooling, and the dude starts just walking away like it's a normal Sunday afternoon. And they're just like, follow that guy. And I followed him, and eventually, like, he got into a car and rode and drove away. And I followed him for like 4 hours, and then my shift ended, and I went home.
And you're
And
supposed to carry that with you,
exactly.
like all these things. You're
Yep.
And I know when we talked about, you know, before the podcast and before the YouTube and all that stuff, when we had like the intro, you mentioned it was like, and you have to do like the after action. You have to watch this stuff to better yourself as an operator.
Mm-hmm.
It's like watching football tape, right? At
Yes.
the end, that's what you attribute it to. And I can only imagine like you have to watch this stuff and over and over and over. And it just, I mean, I've not had experiences like those, but I can only imagine the trouble sleeping or the thoughts that go in your head. Like I recall things that were maybe traumatic in the past, and they just randomly pop in my head. I'm like, oh man, and then it kind of overcomes you for a few hours, maybe a whole day, right? And it changes the way I act with my family and things like that, with my kids, and I hate that, right? And I can only imagine, dude, like the exposure that you had, the constant watching this stuff, how much it could really affect you, dude. And so then you decided to do something about this. You decided to it's affecting you. It's got to be affecting other people. You obviously know other drone operators, sensor operators who this has been affecting. And then at what point in time did like the light switch for you? Like, hey, look, I got to do something about this because this is not right.
Yeah, absolutely. One you touched on a little bit there, and
Hmm.
it was really, obviously the coping mechanisms and stuff like that, and the unhealthy habits. But then it was, just like the constant on edge. For me, I'd get really bad physical symptoms. So like I would get insane chest tightness, like feeling like my rib cage is just being ripped apart, 24/7, right? And it was just like, at first I'm like, it's just because, I was, high speed in the military, then, so that's just the way I feel, and then it took me years to realize like, oh, that's not normal. It's not normal to analyze trying to go to the gas station and, oh, I need, 4.7 gallons of gas in my gas tank, and that's going to give me X amount of miles and blah blah blah, and let me think about all the different things that can happen between now and then and all the things that could go wrong. And it's like, dude, just go fill up the tank. So it was the constant analyzing of everything. And then when you're slowly talking to other people, right, and realizing like, oh, this isn't just me, right? Because we know, being a part of the veteran community is that's the one thing that drives to suicide, and everything else is just the feeling of isolation, and that you're the only person dealing with it. And I realized really quickly that I wasn't, right, and it wasn't until it was a couple things that compounded back in the spring here of this year. That one, we lost an instructor pilot to suicide down at the schoolhouse at Holloman. And it was just, it was just gut wrenching because I had a member on my team. I was standing in his bedroom 24 hours before he pulled the trigger in the exact spot he did it. And I had not a flippin' clue. We were just standing there bitching about work and complaining about stuff and, that kind of stuff. And then the next day, it was technically 36 hours. I got a call one morning. It was like, hey man, Phil's dead. And I'm like, what the, it was like, holy crap. So, it was accumulation of that, right? It was accumulation of, I had a buddy that called me and said, he called me just bawling, right? He's at 18 years. He's, is just a stellar performer, right? Always just been top of the freaking line, right? That person you want, right? You call on him, he's always there, insanely talented, an incredible instructor. But he was getting med boarded for PTSD. And, this has always been a struggle within the community and things like that, with it. But so he's getting med boarded, and because of it, he goes in the room and the doc looks at his paperwork, looks at him and goes, well, you didn't deploy, so how can you have trauma? That was this fucking year, right? 2025, and we're still doing this. Makes me sick to my stomach, right? With it. And it was honestly that call that I went to sleep that night and was just angry because I'm like, holy cow, like how ignorant can you be, And it's like, and I will be the first, I will never compare myself to a dude with the boots on the ground, right? Or anything like that. I can't even imagine, right? But that's not to say that this career field doesn't go through trauma and doesn't go through some shit, and isn't deserving of care and recognition and feeling like a freaking human again. Because when you get told, hey, you've been doing this for almost 20 years, but what you did doesn't matter, that's a fucking punch in the gut completely. So it was honestly that like I shot up in the middle of the night and I went, I'm going to fix this. I want to do something about it. And I really, it was just listening to stories from friends and things like that. And them, telling me different things. And I realized like, holy crap, we were all in the same boat. We're all feeling the same way. Obviously the symptoms and stuff aren't, cookie cutter by any means, but the majority of it, so it really got into why I started Remote Warrior and just kept growing from there.
So when did you start Remote Warrior?
Yeah, so I started that it was right at the end of April of this year.
That's right. Okay. So yeah, just recently.
Yeah.
And I recall like we connected on LinkedIn, and I was scrolling on LinkedIn and I saw a picture and it turned out to be you, right? It was you standing in front of a table, said Remote Warriors on it. And immediately I had no idea what Remote Warriors was at all, but immediately I was intrigued. What is this? Like, who is this person? What do they do? And I started reading about it because Remote Warriors, I assumed it was drones. And then funny enough, like, I liked the post, and then I kept scrolling, and then we connected afterwards. I'm like, it was meant to connect, right? So Remote Warriors. And what I love about what you're doing, man, is I can't recall what you called it. It was those ammo cans with the packs in them. Tell me about that, man. What are they and what are they for?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me do a little show and tell even better. So, it's my little assembly station back there, with it. So these, right, just simple 11-inch ammo can, with it, and we call these our panic packs. With
Mhm.
it, this is one of our ones that I'm in the process of loading up. But it's got all it is for, one of the biggest things for me was dealing with panic attacks, constantly, right? And I was just so sick of it because it was like, what the heck is there to do about this? What? I sit there and just white knuckle through the whole thing. It's like there's no answer for it. It's, oh, deep breathing. Think about a relief on a river, and I'm like, I'm gonna lose my mind. It's like I don't have time. I can't think like that right now. And so, that was always my frustration, going through therapies and things like that with it and trying to make all this make sense, was that there's just no simple, something that's effective and simple, and I don't have to think, right, when I'm in the moment, because that's the hardest thing with a panic attack is realizing, holy cow, my cognition is just shut down. And even if it's something as simple as like turning a couple things on, maybe a fan or closing the blinds, like, or in this case, just needing something to literally hold on to, is hard to do. I don't want to go searching through the house and where did I put that ice pack, or where did I put that, essential oil or whatever it is. And that's really what it came down to. What I realized really quickly was it was just about nervous system regulation. So we created these panic packs, and they've got different things in them, like, an ice pack, with it. Because one of the things that's really great with this is if you're having one, you can take this, crack it, slap it on your chest or slap it on the back of your neck, and
Mhm.
it'll give you that temperature reset, for your nervous system to be like, whoa. I learned about this in a therapy in Boston called Home Base that I went through. And I was having a panic attack, and the nurse came in and she gave me an ice pack, and I'm like, holy shit, this is awesome. It was like, this freaking works completely. So, staple, within the pack itself. And then it essentially hits on all five senses, right? So it's got things like worry stones in there, little like fidget, stuff like that. And that's the funny thing is you open this up and it's like some of it's like, you're like, this looks like toys. It's because it's simple, right? When it comes down to it, it's little clickers that you could sit there and, press and for auditory, stimulation. And all it is it's nothing cosmic. It's just to be able to go, hey, dummy, out of here, right? And right back here, right? With the whole thing. And the beauty of it too is we even created a card that, and it's called the insert that we drop in here, and it literally has all five senses on it, and it doesn't matter what you put in this box, right? You could dump all these contents out and fill it with your own stuff. This card still works, right? With it, because it just, it says simple things like, hold or look at one visual item, watch the movement, light, or detail for 60 seconds, right? Because again, it's just about getting your brain out of that moment and going, hey, right here, you're going to be okay, right? And it's different things like electrolyte packs, to be able to replenish that, right? Because I think of panic attacks, and this is by no means any medical definition or anything, but I associate panic attacks with hypothermia, um and mainly to do with the blood flow, right? Because most of your blood flow goes away from your extremities when you're having one. It goes into your chest, right? Because obviously that's all main organs, and it goes into your legs, with it, and your thighs. And because it's preparing you to run, for you to run, right? That's what the whole fight, flight, and there's actually freeze and fawn, with your sympathetic nervous system. And I've been doing research on those areas for 7 years. And all my degrees and everything else have always been my, drone operator mental health, if you will, has always been, my end goal, there. So, and also what I'm pursuing with my doctorate, too, in psychology, because I switched from aviation to this. Um, so, like I said, the panic packs are great because they're fairly inexpensive, right? It costs about $30 for us to put one together, ship it, everything else. There, so we're in the process of hopefully here in the next month or two, we'll have a way for people to actually directly purchase them on our site, if they need one. We also donate some out. Most of the time, it's out of my pocket. Just donating them to people in the community because I know how horrible this is to live with, and not feel like you're supportive there. And the beauty of it is the panic pack stuff is for anybody, right? Doesn't have to be drones, doesn't have to be, you don't need to be a combat veteran even, right? You could be a civilian, in sales, you know, where you're under a shitload of pressure and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, I was
Tight
going to say
deadlines.
sales does bring a lot of pressure. Probably not
Yeah.
as much as drone operators.
No, 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 and that's the beauty of it. It doesn't discriminate, right? It can be used for depression, it can be used for anxiety, it can be used for panic attacks, it can be used for kids with autism. For helping with like stimming and ticking and different things like that. That's the beauty of the whole thing. And then you just kind of find what works for you and, fill the box, if you will. And then, you have this box that you can slide underneath a bed, slide underneath a nightstand, put on a bookshelf, whatever. And the beauty of it, especially for like someone like me, right, where I've got 4 kids romping through my house. So nothing is ever in the same place that I've left it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Nothing,
You're
I'm
gonna need
like,
some more chest packs for that.
exactly,
4
exactly.
kids.
But it's one of those things where it's like I can't take something and just like, oh, just chuck it in a nightstand, right? Because half the time I open my nightstand and like it's just like, oh, that's on the floor now. So
That's right.
my 4-year-old got a hold of it and just decided to poof. So that was the thought process behind this, right? Is to be able to have something you can go, hey, let's not touch this. And you can keep everything in there, and all the way down to like we have like hot tamales and Sour Patch Kids, right?
Yeah.
We throw in there for the taste reset, with it, and then like lavender essential oils for the smell. And that's the crazy part, right? Especially like the essential oil, right? I thought that was a load of crap the first time, like somebody
No,
told
that's
me
real
about
stuff.
that,
Yeah.
right? Absolutely.
Yeah.
That, and I think a piece that's missed from it is with that you're giving your body familiarity to go, it's okay to be okay in this moment, right? We say that, it's okay to not be okay, but we also got to remind ourselves that it's okay to be okay, right? And that's really what that, like that, a diffuser or an essential oil roller, different things like that, can absolutely help in that manner, because it hits your brain and your brain's like, oh, hey, we're good, right? Because it's repeatable, right? It's that step that you go through every single time, and you're building, and your brain knows, hey, it's all right, right? You're not looking for a threat, right? If you're sitting there at 2 a.m. on your, in your lazy boy with your cameras, on your TV or on your phone, and you're sitting there scrolling through them, going through them over and over and over again. What was that? What was that? Right? You're looking for a threat at that point. That is not helping your nervous system. Right? It feels like it's helping because you're like, well, I'm scanning everything. And it's like, Right? It's the same reason when I look out at my 20 acres up my front lawn and, look in the tree line and I'm like, what was that? I'm like, is that something
You're
out
seeing
there?
things, man.
Yeah. So this gives you that calming, presence with the entire thing, for it. And we've got a mobile version that's going to go into a little Molly pouch. That way people can take them on the go, stuff like that, with it too, that we're in the works of. I'm just working some shelf stability, with a couple products, for it, for like extreme heat and stuff, but that should be coming out in the next month or two as well.
So I love what you're doing with this. It's the panic pack, right? And I wish I would have had something like that when I was in, dude. I recall this one time. I was so concentrated, and I did military law, right? I did military justice. A lot of the stuff was really in depth, a lot of witness interviews, things like that. Reviewing photos and all this. But I was so invested in this, and I barely slept, and I thought about this all the time, right? And it's crazy stuff. That I was in my office, and I sat there and I started getting tunnel vision, right? And I started sweating like crazy, and I didn't know what it was, and then I took off my blouse, right? I unbuttoned it, took it off, put it on the hanger, and I was completely like drenched. I was like, oh shit, but then I walked across the hall to my boss's office, right? This lieutenant colonel. I'm like, hey, he saw me. He's like, Vic, what's going on, man? Have a seat. You feeling okay? I was like, I can't breathe well. I'm getting tunnel vision. And he's like, shoot, dude. So he drove me out to the Naval Hospital, right? Turns out it was like a panic attack. And I've had those before, but not to that extremity. And I just didn't know what it was. I was like, damn, dude. And the doc was like, you need to take some leave. You need to chill out, go hang out with your family, get away from work for a little bit. And that's what I did. I took like a week of leave. But even on leave, I could not get away from work, right? Like,
Mm.
not that they were calling me.
Yeah.
It was just the matter of that's always on your mind.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you always got to work. I got to breathe this stuff. I'm going to walk into a whole lot more work when I get back. You
Mm-hmm.
know, it's a constant, never ending thing.
Exactly.
And I love what you said about being on the alert, man. Because even so now, like, I don't know if you get that, but I'm always like scanning
Mm-hmm.
anywhere I go. I'm always like, you know, threat assessments, this and
Yeah.
that. Um,
It's the reason we sit with our
and
backs to the door,
yeah, yeah, I got it
or
written
facing
down
the
on my
door, I should
whiteboard.
say. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Facing away, kind of in a
Yep.
corner, tucked in.
Yep.
And I got it written down on my whiteboard here because I was going to start reviewing this stuff. Because I also, I'm doing a master's in human behavior psychology, in essence, to get uh, more knowledgeable on what is affecting veterans. And I have it written down here. Is it just me, or does anyone else think about worst case scenarios at all times, i.e., hypervigilance, even after even after being out of uniform?
Absolutely.
So there's a big thing with hypervigilance, and I assume that that is running very high in the drone and the remote community, right? So what you're doing with these panic packs, you know, just having something in your hands, something to keep your mind off of those recurring thoughts, I think is huge. And
Absolutely.
you said you are funding this out of your own pocket. You know, you don't have to get into too much, but how much do one of these things cost to put together?
Yeah, it's about 27.75 to put one together. Average $10 to $13 depending on where we ship it in the lower 48. There. Right now, if we sold some of the we sold 75 of them to the city of El Paso for an event. I just got back from this week. And it was like a veteran service provider event. So we do, we'll do commercial sales with them. We'll do, personal sales with them with it. And right now it's just enough to cover it and, and then account for the time. So we sell them for about $50 on it. And like I said, in the next month or two, we should have a really clean way to have those. But at the same time, if somebody wants one, right, all they got to do is reach out, tell me how many and where to send them. Because I can easily, like QuickBooks invoice it, and it's easy at that point too. So, we're trying to, while we get everything worked up, because we are so new and only 4 months old, we also realize that, the how many people this could help. And so, we're also willing still, while we're getting our feet off the ground, to be able to, supply those if people need them.
So is Remote Warriors a nonprofit?
We're working a nonprofit. We're working what's called the Remote Warrior Foundation, to be able to supply our panic packs. Then also we have 10 different guides. I hand created this. And it's essentially, there's nothing clinical in this. It's just putting words to it, right? And
Mhm.
bringing in psychology topics to make it make sense. But in no way is it like diagnosing or anything like that, per se. But it's definitely, puts these words just like you said, right? With the hypervigilance stuff, there, am I the only person that deals with it? That was really for me, like, I was like, oh my gosh, there's so many people, right? Because I interviewed over 200 operators in 96 hours. Um, which, find me a researcher or anything else that can pull that off. I'm gonna go with probably nobody, right? To get that type of response rate, and I did it on a whim. I was doing it. I was literally looking at the PTSD checklist, the PCL-5, that the VA and almost everybody else in mental health uses. And I was frustrated with it because it always says, like, on like line one or two, it says like, tell me about the event, right? Or something to that effect. And I'm like, which
Which one?
freaking one? I'm like, I got 10,000 of them. Like, I'm like, there's no one event here. Like, and that was my frustration going through, cognitive behavioral therapy, processing therapy, eye movement, desensitization, and rapidization, I think,
Yep, yep.
EMDR, all those things, right? I got so frustrated with them because it just felt like I was just square peg, round hole, right? With all of it. And so I went, okay, what would be a more applicable way to screen drone operators? So I created what's called the Recon Survey, and essentially took a bunch of foundational principles within psychology, stripped down the PCL5, rebuilt it into actual questions that identify things like identity crisis and moral injury, because that's the two biggest pieces that anybody misses when they see, drone operators. They just think, oh, PTSD. And it's like, no, there's so much more than that. It's this crazy layered onion, if you will, that is just, you got to sit there and peel back every layer, right? And it's not as simple as just throwing one modality at somebody and being like, hey, you're cured, kind of thing. There's so many different aspects to this. And that's, where the panic pack stuff came from, is taking the good that has worked, right? And I've talked with other people, and I've had some lengthy discussions, with other operators, and been like, what has worked for you? What hasn't, right? And being able to create it into these guides, this community, right? We have a Discord community for drone operators. We have, these 10 different guides. We're working on a smart home project for it as well. So being able to tie it in with the panic packs and have a way that you could walk into a room and say you got like an Amazon Echo, right, on your or a show, right, a tablet on your desk, that you could walk in, hit a button, and say panic mode, and then it would do things like drop the blinds, turn on a fan, turn on an infuser, right? Play some, calming music, whatever it is, right? And so I'm working like routines within Amazon devices to be able to manipulate them and get them into a process. And hopefully I've got communications open right now with Amazon to hopefully partner with them for something like this, to be able to create a custom UI is really what I'm looking for with it, because we need some type of, an app or something that you can download onto it that says, big red button, you walk in, hit it, because that's the stuff that your brain can't do in the moment, right? You're not going to remember to turn on 10 different things when you walk into a room, but your nervous system wants that, right? It wants predictability and it wants routine, right, with it. And so if you can give it that, that's why panic attacks suck so bad, in my opinion, is because you're always in a moment where it's never convenient to have one, right? And then you just sit there and look around and be like, fuck, what do I do? I don't know, right? I just sit here and go, ah, right? And that's it. Like, that's all. It's like, oh, I just got to wait for this to pass. And, it's like sometimes, man, that could take, I mean, I've had some wipe me out for 24, 48 hours. Right? Like, I'm just so on edge, so spun up that I'm like,
it's even worse when like
function.
Your whole family is out of the house or something.
Yeah.
And nobody's there to kind of assist you, right?
Exactly. Right. I can't be like, hey, babe, go give me that ice pack, kind of thing. Right. So that's really, what it's come from. It's been a lot of trial and error. It's been a lot of like what works, what doesn't kind of thing. But really, that's it, is we're trying to be kind of the one-stop shop for remote warrior mental health, right, when it comes down to it. And because we've got the lived experience, and and that's why I'm pushing so hard to get my doctorate as well, to bring in the credibility piece there for it. But because this gap isn't slowing down anytime soon, right?
I mean, it's gonna be a recurring thing.
Exactly. It's like, look at Ukraine, look at the, Skydio just did a contract with the DoD, for remote warfare, and then the schoolhouse is re-ramping up production here. So it's like, while the tempo might be different, the missions might be different, right? You can't tell me at the end of the day, though, that there's not going to be still similar issues and similar struggles that these individuals go through. And so that's why also we've created training programs for every area. So being VA, industry, clinicians, Guard and Reserve units. I'm working with a Wisconsin Guard unit right now on a custom training program for them to be able to brief their operators from an operator perspective and go, these are the things that you can do in your day-to-day, because I understand your ops tempo, right? And I've been there and sat in the seat. And that's where the hardest part is, especially any military leader in the role. They're still so disconnected, because when you're flying 6 to 7 to 8 to 10, 12 hours every single night for years on end, when a commander walks in and checks a box by flying once a month kind of thing, they don't have a clue what their people are going through, unfortunately. So it's one of those that this issue isn't going to go away, and it's not going to stop. Because it's something that nobody could predict it, but it's here, right? We're about to hit the 20-year mark of the MQ-9 because it came out in 2008, right? So it also means we're about to hit the very first career, you know, drone operator with it too, being the people that have sat in that career field for 20 years. And I can tell you the handful that are getting close are not in good shape, right? They are not at all in good shape. And we need to take care of them. We need to take care of them now.
Do you foresee any of this going the route of just like AI or something where the operator is a computer vice having a person there? I feel like there's always going to be a need for a person to sit there, if even for quality control or even to recalibrate things, just to keep an eye on it. You need to have that human there. Do you see any future where it's going to be humanless?
I don't. I mean, it's the same reason why in commercial aviation, granted it's only been around for, 100 years ish, but it's the same reason in commercial aviation why you still have a pilot in the cockpit. They aren't doing much, It's, when it comes down to it, I mean, the damn things can tick off and land themselves. But it's a lot of public perception, right? And that's the same thing with like when I was teaching counter UAS courses at the University of North Dakota. That's a lot of parts that I would talk about. Is that's the problem with this is the public perception piece, right? And that's why especially like 2016 when quads and stuff started getting used a lot, everybody freaked out, right? Because everyone's like, oh, I don't understand, it's new. And then you see the stuff that happened in New York and all that too. The public perception is huge. So that's going to shape a lot of policies, and I think that impacts a lot more than people realize. Because I can say whatever, and it can be technically correct, but if the public doesn't like it, good luck, being able to operate that way. And you're going to tell me that we already had enough protesters and things like that would literally come marching up to our gate, 40 miles away. They'd walk from Las Vegas and go right up to the gate and lay in the road and block us from going in or out of the base.
Mhm.
And then the local PD would have to come in and everything else, and and that was like happened like I don't know, a handful of times while I was there, kind of thing. So I just don't see them ever taking the human out of the loop completely. There, I mean, we'd have to get a lot of people would have to get really cool about a lot of stuff real quick for that to happen, right? And I
Yeah,
just don't
and
see that happening
I don't foresee that happening
with
either.
people. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be hard. People will be hard pressed to change things overnight, and change the public
absolutely.
perception of things. A couple things, man. The automated systems. I like where that's going. I like where that's headed. If you can do something like that, not if, but when, right? Because the technology is there.
Yeah.
Like what I do is when I pull up to the house, when I remember to have location services on my phone, when I pull up to the house, the interior lights of the house turn on, right? As it catches my location services with the Wi-Fi. I don't know exactly how it works, but it will turn it on. Sometimes I have it to where like Frank Sinatra radio will turn on as I walk in, right? So, or you can program it to say, on the Amazon, whatever show or whatever it is, the little screen to say, hey, welcome home, Victor, or something like that. You can program that stuff, right?
Yeah.
It would be so cool if you can program it to, I guess, start a diffuser with like lavender or like just low lights, and not necessarily when you have location services on only. That's the only way I've been able to figure that part out.
Yeah.
But if it can pick up, or if there's like a keyword, hey, Alexa, panic attack or something, and all of a sudden everything kind of automates. That'd be so awesome, dude.
Exactly.
And I went on your site and you have like a list starting to accumulate, right? On things from Amazon that you can purchase that will help out the automation, right? So yeah, that's awesome. I keep going with that, dude, because that is a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great idea.
Yeah, it's great, and exactly like you said, we're trying to figure out all the little quirks and things like that with it, and make it just as seamless as possible for somebody to be able to go in, buy it, you know, maybe purchase a guide, a setup, like a custom setup guide for it, that can then help them walk them through. All right, this is what you need to do, that kind of thing, XYZ with it. These are the commands to set up, all of it. I'm hoping in the next couple months we can get that all ironed out.
Yeah, even like just have a short YouTube video that's only accessible to folks, or maybe even public, saying if you have the Remote Warrior setup guide or setup, here's how you do it. That'd be awesome, dude. Easily accessible. People can just go on it, rewind it if they need to, rewatch it. Very cool. And I feel like with all of this, man, you already have like you're set up for your dissertation when it comes to your doctorate, right?
Yeah.
With all this, all the research that you're already doing.
Hmm.
A lot of folks, like when I was looking at the doctorates myself, right, for psychology and all that, I was thinking, what the hell would I even write on? Like, but I think you got a good niche there that's
Yeah.
going to be awesome for a dissertation, man. And I look forward to
Absolutely.
reading it on Google Scholar at some point in
Yes.
time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you mentioned EMDR. I've done EMDR both with the
Hmm.
fingers
Hmm.
and with the little clickers,
Yep.
right? And I think that might be something that you even add into your box, right? Just two
Hmm.
little clickers,
Hmm.
just left, right, left, right, left, right. I don't know. I have not done enough research to understand if you need somebody there asking
Hmm.
you questions or talking to you while you're doing it. Uh, but I know that EMDR really works.
Yeah.
The way I understand it and the way it went for me was it's almost like a filing system in your
Hmm.
brain. And then you take what's bothering you and then you file it to the back so it's not on your mind all the time. Yeah. So VA whole health, man, that's something new that I just encountered,
Hmm.
where the VA kind of gives you the approvals, I guess, to do kayaking, to do
Yeah.
yoga within the community and all that stuff. So that could be something that you incorporate with remote warriors in some way, somehow. Maybe have you ever thought of like doing retreats for remote warriors?
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of on our, like, 5-year plan, if you will,
Okay, okay.
with it, and be able to eventually, do something like that. Get everybody together, that kind of thing, and have some topics and things like that to discuss. So that's the beauty of it too, is what I'm doing. I'm constantly, just like how you and I connected. It's like constantly looking for podcast hosts, also clinicians, CEOs of mental health organizations, whatever. Because there's so many ways that we can benefit this specific
Yes.
community, but also as a whole too, with the Panic Pack Initiative and those types of things too, which is just, I was honestly like overjoyed when I realized, holy cow, like this can be so much bigger, and help so many more people, especially because, I have a son that has autism, and so it was one of those that was like, oh my gosh, like this is almost a no brainer, with how easy, this can be used to utilize and help so many more people and not just our community.
Yeah, it really can, man. I mean, I can see the how useful the panic packs could be for all the folks out there. What would you say to folks, either civilians, veterans, policymakers, people out there about remote combat trauma? What would you tell them about it, just to kind of get folks more educated?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one, right, there's still a lot of stigmas that exist within this community, unfortunately.
Hmm.
And one of the biggest ones, like people say, is always like, "Oh, it's just a video game," and it's like, nah, that can't be farther from the truth, right? These people are some of the most tactically proficient, quick thinkers, fast on their feet, right? Because we're constantly having to make decisions just so quick, with it, and they can be so capable, with it too. So, just because somebody comes from that community, one, don't dismiss what they've done, because holy cow, especially if, you know, anybody 10 plus years ago when we were really in the heyday of it, they've been through a lot. And it's a lot, it's been a lot of, getting told that, of it, and dealing with like invalidation across the board from clinicians, from peers, from leaders, all of it. And so, it's one of those that just listen to their story, because if you take 15 minutes and truly listen, right? Um, you're going to be amazed at, how resilient these people are. And what they've been through, and they are, again, some of the most capable people out there. I mean, some of the best instructors I ever met, were in this community, with it, and they could teach you anything, with it, and do it with just such precision and technicality. So, it's, don't overlook them, be understanding, right, of what they've been through. And really, that's a lot of it, right? That's why they deal with isolation and things like that. And for anyone within the community, that may be watching this, it's one of those that you're not alone, right? You're not, those thoughts that are going through your head, everybody's dealing with them. Everybody, I promise you, because I've seen it time and time and time again with it. I've been there, right? So,
Yeah.
that's the crazy thing with like our fog of war guide, right? We have 10 different symptoms that I think are very unique to this community. I deal with every single one of them, at some point in my life. So, worst case, at the end of the day, I get it. It's the whole reason I did this and the whole reason I believe in this. So, reach out, talk to somebody, and then, and it's, and don't just put the lip service behind it. Freaking do it, right? Because you're not getting any better sitting there and sulking through what you've been through, and this goes for anybody, right? In any mental health situation, it's like you're not getting any better sitting there and sulking with what you've been through. The only person that's going to change what's happening in your life is you, so you have to get up and put the work in and, find that motivation, find that hobby, find that community, right? That gives you that purpose and gives you, a reason to put your feet on the floor every morning. Cause sometimes that's the hardest freaking battle. Is just putting your damn feet on the floor and going, oh crap, another day. Right. But you can control that, and so you got to find what works for you. You've got to find, the therapy or the modality or the community that will put you in a better mindset there, because they do exist and there's plenty of people out there that do care and do get it. So, don't feel like you're alone in that situation, and you can absolutely, reach out to us, and we can help you navigate all of it, because we've all been there, when it comes down
Excellent.
to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's very easy to fall into that isolation mode.
Mm-hmm.
I think very easy. Then you're just kind of stirring in your own thoughts. And a lot of times, not many good things happen from that. So
Mm-hmm.
it is imperative that veterans who are in this mode kind of connect with other folks, whether it be veterans, civilians, whoever, just kind of get out, just refocus on something else because you don't want to stew in that mindset. Tanner, where can folks find more information about remote warriors?
Absolutely. So we've got our website, remotewarriorllc.com. That'll be coming soon with the panic packs on there, the page for it. But we've got a ton of our resources on there. And I'll send you some links here we can throw in the notes there as far as our resource library that goes as well. And then really Remote Warrior LLC on pretty much every social media platform out there: Instagram, Facebook, um, LinkedIn. And then we also have our Discord too, called the Reaper Room there. So yeah, always willing to help out, in any way there. Education, whatever it is, that's what we do when it comes down to it, is just trying to fill this gap. And there's a lot of them when it comes to this community, and it's not anybody's fault, but now that we've identified them and see it's a problem, we've got to get ahead of it before it gets too out of hand.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Well, awesome, Tanner, man. It was great having you on here. Definitely going to link everything in the description here. Aside from that, man, it has been truly a pleasure and honor to have you on here, man, and to listen to your story, to hear about what you're doing for the community and how we can make it just a little bit better than it was yesterday. Truly appreciate it, man.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Victor.
Yeah.